On this week's Political Figure episode, we've got the person who makes Vivek Ramaswamy even less special than he thinks he is, Nikki Haley. Nimrata Nikki Randhawa, I think, was born January 20th, 1972 in Bamberg, South Carolina. And if that sounded a lot less white than you were expecting, me too. Turns out she's a first-generation Indian Sikh immigrant. Her parents were from Punjab, India. Her dad had a PhD and is a professor, or was a professor, and her mom has a master's and a law degree and is also a professor here in the United States. On top of teaching, her mom owned a clothing store called Exotica International, a clothing company she would become the bookkeeper and CFO for. In 94, Nikki would graduate with her bachelor's in accounting from Clemson University, and in 96, she would marry Michael Haley, donning a more palatable name for Republicans in her future political career. Started her political career early in 1998, becoming a board member for the Orangeburg Chamber of Commerce, and she'd be an active part of a number of associations for women-owned businesses. In 2004, she was elected to the South Carolina State House. That made her the very first Indian American woman to serve an elected office in South Carolina, and she was also the first representative to be named majority whip as a freshman. It was here she started to show herself as a more, old school conservative, but this was the early 2000s, so I guess I would just make her a regular school conservative. She came in with the goal to lower taxes, and then voted to raise sales tax in the state by 1%. But she did vote against taxes on unprepared foods, which I think is good, and also a tax exemption for owner-occupied residential property, which I am a big fan of. I mean, having to pay, current market value taxes on a property you already paid for and own and pay the taxes on is fucking ridiculous, especially if it's your personal residence, and it's a big burden for low-income and fixed income property owners, especially like if you bought your house decades ago for $80,000 and now you're retired and the government tells you your house is worth $450,000 and now you've got to rent the house that you bought and paid for from the government based on that value every year just so you have a place to live, especially when the unrealized gains in rich people's stock portfolios is never taxed, but the unrealized gains of Mima's house are taxed annually. That's kind of fucked up. And also, we shouldn't tie education to property taxes for just a ton of fucking reasons. But to get back on track, education is something that Nikki Haley has some bad views on. She's voted in favor of vouchers and charter schools and school choice, which just means that Mima, who can't afford to pay her property taxes, property tax money is going to subsidize rich people sending their kids to private schools. Well, the poor kids in Mima's district have to go another year without updating the computers in the computer lab from Windows 98 because it's just not in the budget. Little Nikki also believes that immigration laws should be more strictly enforced and that immigrants should be forced to carry around documentation to prove that they're here legally because she got theirs, fuck all them, and profiling is fun. In fact, Nikki Haley was elected governor of South Carolina in 2011, and one of the very first laws she signed was an Arizona-style immigration law. However, most of it was blocked because, it's blatant unconstitutional profiling. She's anti-choice when it comes to abortion, which I'm sure nobody is surprised to hear, and she voted numerous times in favor of abortion restrictions as a state legislator and signed a 20-week abortion ban as governor. On the bright side, she did eventually agree to have a Democratic lieutenant governor, which is kind of cool, and she appointed Tim Scott to be a U.S. Senator, replacing Jim DeMint when he just quit to go be president of the Heritage Foundation, like a true asshole. But that made the man that she appointed the very first African-American U.S. Senator from South Carolina. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a big Tim Scott fan, but progress is progress, especially in the state that literally started a war so they could own people like him. Some other things she's kind of commendable on. She was an early supporter of just flying the Confederate flag like fucking everywhere. South Carolina really loves their Confederate flag. Remember that whole war thing that they started? Yeah, they're real proud of their treason rag. And then the whole Dylan Roof thing happened, and she's like, maybe the people associated with this symbolism aren't the best people. And I can see now, after a church full of people were literally unalived for this type of ideology, that maybe it is more hurtful to people when they see this flying on government property. And I guess that we should probably not do that anymore. Credit where it's due, she was willing to keep an open mind, grow, and change in her position in light of new understanding and empathy to the people that she represents. A little more credit where it's due, her history on LGBTQ and specifically trans issues isn't great, but it's not horrible. As governor, she refused to support an anti-trans bathroom bill, saying that it was pointless and didn't actually address any real fucking problem. She also says she's in support of freedom for same-sex marriage, but she did also say that the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida didn't go far enough, and she doesn't support trans women competing in women's sports. So like I said, checkered, but at least she hasn't made it identity politics, so I guess that's commendable in today's day and age. God, that's sad. She's also got like a super big lady boner for Israel, which is, you know, not a great look right now. But that's probably a big part of the reason Donald Trump selected her to be U.S. ambassador to the UN. And in true Nikki Haley fashion, as ambassador to the UN, some of the shit she did was, you know, not so bad, and some shit was absolutely reprehensible. She always vocally supported strong aid to Ukraine against Russia. She publicly and openly disagreed with Donald Trump and said she would absolutely never support a Muslim ban. Not really to do with the UN, but she said any women with allegations against Trump assaulting them had the right to be heard and that they should be heard. She spoke out against the murders and prosecutions of gay men in Chechnya, also of reporters in Myanmar and Muslims in China. All that stuff, not so bad, pretty respectable, but then it starts to get so bad. She supported Trump's decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear agreement, which was resoundingly bad foreign policy. And then from there, everything that little Nikki did as ambassador to the UN had to do with ass-kissing Israel to the greatest possible extent. She voted against a UN Human Rights Council capital punishment resolution that would, you know, really restrict or ban the use of capital punishment, specifically when it came to blasphemy, adultery, and homosexual relationships, because, you know, some countries still kill people for that shit. Not really sure what the reasoning was for voting against that, since they came out and said, hey, we as the United States condemn the death penalty being used in those circumstances. And so they're like, why didn't you vote for it then? And they're like, well, because we thought it was too vague, and, you know, the death penalty can be fun sometimes, and we don't want that taken away. Although the real reason much more likely goes back to Israel, because the following year the US pulled out of the UN Human Rights Council because, according to Haley, they had a chronic anti-Israel bias, and the council treats Israel worse than Iran, North Korea, and Syria. Funny that an international human rights council would have bias against a country that for generations has been committing all kinds of human rights violations, up to and including genocide against a city full of children. Who would have thunk that killing hundreds or thousands of defenseless civilians every year could put you on the radar of a human rights council? But it didn't stop there. Haley also agreed with the U.S. moving the embassy in Israel from its capital in Tel Aviv to part of not Israel in Jerusalem. She also blocked the appointment of a Palestinian and a UN envoy to Libya because they're like, well, the U.S. doesn't consider Palestine a country, so can't have a Palestinian on an envoy. Again, just an unnecessarily dick move for no fucking reason. Especially since in a diplomatic sense in the region, some of those countries, you know, do recognize Palestine as a real place, and probably would have appreciated a Palestinian being on the envoy. No good reason for that call. Well, except to make crybaby BB happy so he didn't throw a fucking tantrum. And in 2018, Nikki Haley was proudly the mouthpiece for Trump's decision to withhold humanitarian aid to Palestine, because again, fuck them kids, I guess. Then Nikki Haley resigned in 2018, and we're really not sure why. Could be with the shit show of the Kavanaugh appointment and just Trump looking more and more awful by the day that she just didn't want to be associated with it anymore. It could be that it came on the heels of an ethics watchdog group accusing her of accepting gifts in the form of like private luxury jet rides and shit like that. It could be that she just likes resigning from things because she's done it a lot. So then in the meantime, she went and did some, you know, fundraising for conservative politicians and shit, which is unsurprising. And she also sat on the board of directors for Boeing. So she did that for a while, and now she's running for president. She's currently running third in the Republican primaries behind Ron DeFascist and a dude who's campaigning from courtrooms. And she's deciding to run on ever-popular policy platforms like a 15-week abortion ban, budget cuts to Medicare and Social Security, raising the retirement age, acknowledging that anthropological climate change is a very real thing, and then vowing to adamantly reject any policies that would do anything to address it, which is a weird stance to take considering the demographics you should be trying to pander to. It's real, so you hoax people are morons, but also fuck anybody who wants to leave a planet for their grandchildren. Haley's handies for Netanyahu's nads has also continued. In light of recent events, she has continued her unwavering support of Israel, regardless of what crimes against humanity they continue to commit, saying that the U.S. needs them, and under her leadership, we will always support them no matter what. And just so we're clear, she is absolutely the best candidate of the entire Republican primaries. She's the most qualified and experienced and the most level-headed out of any of them, and that is horrifying. But also reasonable doesn't seem to be what the Republican base is really looking for these days. So running third behind the man who will look naked from a distance instance, when he dons the jumpsuit he'll likely have to wear before the next election, and Captain Pudding Fingers, I don't think we have a whole lot of concern about little Nicky being the next president of the United States.